Jeez, man. Alright, I'm back now, but an important thing to note is that I'm not pregnant, but I do deliver. I've got a commando video in the works, but that doesn't matter right now, as the Swarmer rework is pretty cool, I must say. And before I forget to mention, the Swarmer rework aims at Swarmer's boss killing along with his single target potential. And yes, this guy's absolutely broken, but let's take a look at the stats real quickly. And anyways, level 0 is the start for one of the most horrendously powerful boss killing event towers that we have seen so far in the entirety of TDS before his nerf. But the Swarmer costs a measly 450 cash to place, with 1 damage along with a fire rate of 2 and 13 range. And before I forget, the Swarmer has a max B stack cap of 5. Although, that's not all, as we have to take into consideration regarding the Swarmer's Bs. So that means that the B damage right here is 1, with a tick of 1 second and a sting time of 4 seconds, bringing the total elapsed B damage to 4 with a maximum sting DPS of 5. But on level 1, the Swarmer gains 1 damage on both ends for his base damage and B damage. And yes, that means that you can now just one-shot abnormals. Just the Swarmer the strongest in that case, but the Swarmer also gains 5 more B stacks. And yes, this does raise the maximum sting DPS to 20, which is quite a big number. But for level 2's case, there are quite a few changes, but let's start with the obvious, as the Swarmer gains 2 damage, 2 range, and a fire rate decrease of 0.5. But for the case of his Bs, the B tick rate goes down by 0.25 seconds, along with the sting time increasing by 0.5 seconds, and yes, the B stack again does increase by 5. Along with the sting DPS increasing to 40.5, which is a little more than double. But on level 3, the Swarmer gets 6 damage, 3 range, and a fire rate decrease of 0.25. But the B changes only consist of a sting time increase of 0.75. Although, the maximum sting DPS doesn't increase as much, as it can only go up to 53.4. And that's not all, as the Swarmer regains his Beehive Grenade ability. But just to keep it short, the Beehive Grenade has a funny damage of 10, an explosion range of 6, and a 15-second cooldown. And yes, this Beehive Grenade counts as an explosive, so therefore, it can eat through lead and bypass defense. Also, the Swarmer B stack cap increases by 5. On level 4, the Swarmer gets 5 damage, 2 range, and a fire rate decrease of 0.25 again. But for the case of the Bs, the Swarmer gains 1 B damage and got an increase of sting time by 0.25. But the maximum sting DPS is now 100, which is quite a lot, but it does take time to build up, I suppose. And for the Swarmer's Beehive Grenade, the grenade gains 20 damage and gets an explosion range increase of 2. And yes, the B stack cap increases by 5 once more, but thank God they kept the Swarmer's extra level, with that being level 5, which is now the Beekeeper of Death. But anyways, the Swarmer gains 10 damage and a fire rate decrease of 0.75. And for the Bs, the Swarmer gets a tick rate decrease of 0.5 and a really funny sting time increase of 2.5, making the B's sting time last for 8 seconds. Dear lord. That also means that the Swarmer's max sting DPS can now go up to 180, and it only takes around 15 seconds to build this up. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves, as the Swarmer's Beehive Grenades get some pretty minor changes, as the Beehive Grenade damage increases by 20, along with an explosion range increase of 1. And guess what? The B stack cap once again increases by, well, you know the answer already. But albeit, I'm sure that there's a lot of things that people could miss with the Swarmer, so I'm gonna discuss some of them, mainly regarding how the Swarmer works in general. Now for starters, the Swarmer's DPS is pretty spammable, and it's pretty consistent too, as the DPS will barely take its time to drop as it relies on the B stack count. And remember, it's mainly due to the fact that every time the Swarmer applies a V-Stack, it resets the expiration timer. And another major thing to note is that the V-Stacks do last 8 seconds, and it doesn't go down all at once, which is pretty busted. But we do have to note that with the recent balance changes revolving around the B-Stack cap is that it takes a level 5 Swarmer around close to 15 seconds to reach the B-Stack limit, which sounds like a lot of time on paper, but trust me, you'll reach it a lot sooner than you think. And I'm not basing this off of any fire rate buffs, just to be clear, but you don't exactly need Commander for the Swarmers in this case, as the BD buff tick rate is unaffected by any buffs whatsoever, and that does include both fire rate and damage buffs. But hey, there's absolutely nothing wrong with wanting to reach the B-Stack cap quicker, but it isn't 100% necessary. But an important thing to note here is that it takes exactly 50 Swarmers to reach the global max B-Stack cap of 1.5k. But let's be real, you won't be hitting the global cap anytime soon in a solo game, let alone a duo game, as it's just not worth it for some certain situations. And remember, a max Swarmer can only get up to 180 Sting DPS for 30 of his B-Stacks alone. Well yeah, maybe towers like Pursuit and Turret do indeed have intense DPS outputs, but I'm gonna make it clear, the moment these towers start firing, they will immediately start doing DPS that can go up to the hundreds. But for the Swarmer's case, he needs time to build them, as the Swarmer looks like he's designed to be a damage ramp-up tower. But I do want you to remember that in cases such as speedrunning boss kills, the Swarmer is very situational, so towers like the Golden Minigunner and Engineer can accelerate and possibly kill bosses faster than the Swarmer in certain situations. And another thing I have to note is that once the max Swarmer reaches his B-Stack cap of 30, it takes around 4 minutes for all of his stacks to deplete at once. So if you're in a solo hardcore match fighting the Void Reaver, then I suppose the Swarmers could do you some justice. And remember, you don't even need to have the Swarmer attacking an enemy at all times once he's reached a high enough B-Stack, so you can just leave the Swarmer hanging until the boss itself dies. But please note that once you sell a Swarmer, his remaining B-Stacks on an enemy will stop doing damage. And yes, they still do decay, but as I've mentioned, the B-Stacks will practically do nothing. Just don't sell the Swarmer unless you really have to. But there are some exceptions that I don't really want to list here. But I'll set up an example of Swarmer's raw DPS when we get to the damage benchmark. Although, nothing much changed for the lower levels of the Swarmer in general besides the tower cost and B-Stack cap. But the Swarmer is generally a funky tower. I mean, after experimenting with this tower for a while, I found some pretty funny things. The first one being the ability to do some trolling and permanently cap the BD buff damage to 1. So let me explain. Let's use a base level Swarmer as an example. So if the level 0 Swarmer is the first Swarmer that applies a B-Stack onto an enemy, the B debuff damage is obviously gonna be 1, and it will stay that way until all of the remaining B-Stacks on an enemy are all depleted. So that means that any other Swarmer that's a higher level than the level 0 Swarmer will permanently have their B-Stack damage capped at 1 for that certain enemy. And what makes it worse is that even if all of the level 0 Swarmers B-Stacks do decay, the B-Stack damage will stay at 1 if there are other remaining Swarmers that kept up the B-Stack. And the only way to counteract this is to wait for all of the B-Stacks on that certain enemy to decay. But you don't have to worry about this so much, as the main purpose of the Swarmer revolves around single target and boss killing, so you are most likely gonna have max Swarmers laying around rather than a couple of lower levels. But this bug can go the other way around, so you can theoretically spam level 0 Swarmers that have the effectiveness of a max level Swarm. But what's really stopping them is their maximum B-Stack cap of 5, so I suppose you can't really abuse this. But well, I'll be doing something new. And what I'm talking about is a 60-second damage benchmark, which isn't exactly gonna be 100% accurate, so please just take this with a grain of salt. And the towers that I'll be putting Swarmer against are gonna be the Accelerator and Turret with their default placement limits, with the exception of 8 Swarmers, and I say 8 Swarmers rather than the brainless Swarmer spam that a lot of us would be doing, along with the fact that all towers in this test will each be given 100 range. And why would I give them 100 range? Well, I'll just explain it in another video coming in like maybe a year or so. Prepare for that, I guess. But anyways, looking at the graphs for the 15-second test, the Accelerator seems to be ahead of the Swarmer by a great amount. But once we take a look at both of the Swarmers, they seem to be almost neck to neck in this test, as the pre-rebalance Swarmer has a higher fire rate than the post-rebalance Swarmer. So therefore, the post-rebalance Swarmer can provide a much higher DPS output, as well as stacking the B-Stacks at a much quicker rate. And it becomes more apparent in the 30-second test as the pre-rebalance Swarmer starts to overtake by then, as the Swarmer in that case had a much higher B-stack cap, which was 150 for each Swarmer at the time. Despite this, the Accelerator still lays ahead from the other three. And I know I haven't been discussing about the turret much, but I'll just leave it at that. Although, once we finally reached the 1 minute mark, we ended off with the Accelerator being the MVP here, as the Accelerator did 172,000 damage, along with both Swarmers coming in second and third respectively, with that being the pre-rebalance Swarmer with 163,000 damage, and the post-rebalance Swarmer with 95,000 damage. And on another side note, the pre-rebalance Swarmer ended with 625 B stacks, while the post-rebalance Swarmer ended up with 240. But to be fair, each Swarmer could only go up to 30 B stacks, equating to a total of 180 DPS. And I'm not accounting for the Swarmer's raw DPS, by the way. But unlike the old Swarmer where he can get up to 150 B stacks, which can get up to 1200 DPS, and yes, I'm accounting that DPS on one Swarmer alone, so you could imagine how horrendously powerful the Swarmer could really become during the time of his rework. But however, I did decide to do a 120-second test with the usual 8 Swarmers before the balance changes, and yes, the difference is still huge. But once we take a look at the graph, it shows here that the rebalance Swarmer takes the lead during the 30-second mark. But that won't last long, as the rebalance Swarmer is held back by his fairly low B-stack cap compared to the pre-rebalance Swarmer, which had a B-stack cap that could go up to 150. Although, after the 30-second mark passes, the pre-rebalance Swarmer starts to accelerate like crazy. And once we hit the 1 minute mark, the pre-rebalance Swarmer is already far ahead by nearly 70,000 damage, and to even think that the pre-rebalance Swarmer climbs the graph by a drastic amount is still unfathomable to me. And at the end of this test, the pre-rebalanced Swarmer ends off with an impressive 615,000 damage, with each Swarmer doing 1,200 DPS, which is the highest DPS amount we will ever see from a tower in the history of TDS for probably a really long time. But looking at the current Swarmer we have today, it really does seem like that his B-stack cap is holding him back by quite a good chunk. Although, I'll be completely real with you, but having a consistent 180 DPS from the Swarmer's Bs alone is still a phenomenal deal. And sure, the Swarmer may not come as close to towers like Pursuit, Turret, and Golden Minigunner for their raw DPS, as we do have to note that the Swarmer is insanely cost efficient compared to the high-end DPS towers that are always going to be up for grabs, as well as the fact that the Swarmer has no placement limit at all, so the damage benchmarks I did here may not be the most accurate, but like I've stated earlier, the test consisted of only 8 Swarmers, not 5, not 10, and not even 20. So yes, the Swarmer's potential is still very high. And it doesn't even matter too much if an enemy leaves the Swarmer's range, as the B-stacks will still continue to do damage until all the B-stacks deplete. But please, even if you didn't get to buy the Swarmer, it doesn't mean that you could, and not even should, dwell on it. It's 2025 now, and the balancers are doing an fair job at keeping our evergreen towers still relevant for today's meta. And please don't bash in the balancers or any of the QA team at all. At the very least, they managed to rebalance Swarmer to keep him at a fair ground compared to all of the evergreen DPS options we have today, so you really don't have to worry about missing out on this guy. But anyways, I'm hoping you've had a fair share of fun watching this video while I absolutely hated— nah, I'm just kidding.